Got the wrong notebook up here. I got my speech notebook right here. There are 27, I think it is, historic markers around Bemis. And I don't know of very few people that know where all 27 are. But tonight I'd kind of like to go through and give you the background on the markers. Sometimes you'll see a marker and that's all you know is what the 12 words are, but you don't know a lot about it. So the very first marker is the one we find down at the intersection. Just a minute, let me get me a ball off. Way back there in 2000, we wanted to, we came in contact with a woman named Barbara Stegall, and she was on a Tennessee Historical Commission, and she wanted to know if we needed a sign, a historical marker, and she described what they were, and I said, oh yeah, they're all over Tennessee. She said, well, I can get you one. And because she was on the Tennessee Historical Commission, so she started working on it. And I gave a lot of information to Linda Higgins, who's a professional writer, and she knows how to put words into a sentence. And she cut words out and made words fit and done different things, and that was what we ended up with. And it says, founded in 1900 by Judson Moss Bemis, the president of the Bemis Brothers Bag Company. Bemis was a cotton mill town, planned by Albert Farwell Bemis. Now that was his son. A renowned architects Andrew Hepburn and Arthur Shercliffe. A self-contained town, Bemis consisted of a four-story mill, worker housing, church, auditorium, theater, schools, company store, YMCA, public bathhouse, park, post office, and other commercial features. And has anybody ever read that sign? Got out of their car and went and read it? Like 3 people.
Read it that day that it was put up.
Yeah. And the other side, a lot of these signs are the same on both sides, but this one, we had a lot of information, so it's different on the second side. It says in the 1940s, the Bemis population was approximately 4,000 people. I checked here recently, and I think it's down around 1,200 now. It's way down. They had 3 and 4 kids in a home back then. In June of '68, the company began selling houses, and the city of Jackson annexed Bemis on December the 29th, 1977. Well, what happened was Bemis had been fighting it for a number of years, like 4 or 5 years. And finally, on December the 29th, federal judge, I guess it was, said that the law where Jackson could annex Bemis was valid and constitutional, and therefore Bemis, that was the reason it was that on that particular day, he decided to get it in before the year was over, December the 29th. 3 years later, Bemis Company sold the mill, and Bemis ceased being a cotton mill town when the mill closed on August 1st of 91. On December 16th of 91, Bemis was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So that's Bemis in a nutshell, and it's where you almost have to get out to read it, and it's a dangerous place, but at least you can see it and park at Walgreens and walk over and get on the grass and read it. But this was on May the 16th of 2000 was when we installed that sign on Bemis Days, just before Bemis Days. And the Jackson Sun covered it, WBBJ covered it, and Barbara Stegall, the one that, whatever, she was there, and she had a couple of friends who were on the Historic Commission visiting with her too. She told them to be there too. So that's sign number 1. I'm gonna have to hurry up here because we got 27 of these things, plus we got the Indians to talk about, but I'll hurry. The Bemis Gin, before July 1945, the site where the Bemis Gym is located was a baseball field. That was Bemis's baseball field. And except for a few pickup games, which were played right down in front of the Y. Those games were, home plate was right on Missouri Street at Young Street. And Latham's Grocery was in center field. And sometimes Latham would get one in their parking lot, it'd roll over that far. But in July of '45, 2 houses were moved from behind the skating rink, and they made the new ball field. So that left that space completely unused. And that's word, I guess they already knew ahead of time, but they started making plans for a gym. And they put the new gym there, and in 1952, this gym was the first year of operation. And 53 was the first year of operation, first when the cotton came in. They started building it in 52, and 53 was grand opening. Next sign was Heron Chapel. Now Heron Chapel was the Baptist church, First Baptist before it was First Baptist. It was called Heron Chapel. We have a sign there. And these, the people that started Heron Chapel, they were the first group to leave the Union Church in 1912. By that time, the Union Church had moved out of the company store into the new building, which we have another marker on, but they moved there in summertime. I forgot what month it was, of 1912. And they have all kinds of pictures of the old building at the church if you'd like to see something like that. As you come up Bemis Lane, there's a sign right where the railroad used to be, the IC Railroad, and it's called Entering Historic Bemis. And that's about all it says. But if you'll notice that little orange, yellow thing at the bottom, that is a little flip-top box thing. And I put different maps and so forth in there from time to time, and they disappear. But I don't know if kids are getting them out or people are actually taking the things and driving around town and looking at the markers. But that's what that little thing is at the bottom there. And that is the official edge of Bemis right there. People at the Heron Chapel or First Baptist, and Patton Block, that's Bemis. Even Eastport, that's Bemis. And I noticed the other day the Bemis bus runs all the way to Walmart, so I guess Walmart is Bemis. But anyway, that is the historic Bemis city limits. Then we have the auditorium sign, which is next, and it was built in 1921, 22. Like I said, it took a while to build this place, and but notice the price tag, $80,000 and $850. We see that every time we come in the building here, but that's rather eye-opening. The next is the lumber shed, which is right across the parking lot there, and that was given in memory of Floyd and Ivor Wilson Johnson, sponsored by Joe and Sue Roark. Some of these signs were not sponsored, and most of them that are not sponsored were paid for by Billy Joe King out at Mercer, who was a Bemis guy, and he put them up on his own and didn't put his name on them or anything. But the lumber shed was one of the first ones one of the ones that we put them in memory of, and cost to get that on there, you know. Then the IC Spur, there was the railroad that came up at right down the middle there where the edge of Bemis was. It comes in, actually it starts up here what the railroad people call Bemis Junction. You heard of Petticoat Junction. Well, there's a Bemis Junction, and it's up there where the railroad splits about 3 different ways. And but this ICR, or the railroad, it took took cloth from the Bemis mill and sent it all over the world, right through that little spur. And Richard Fisher says, "Oh, let's just take that thing and sell it for scrap iron." You know how Richard was. He always jabbing somebody. And I said, "Man, that's historic stuff." He says, "Oh, what's the difference? Let's just take the money and go eat." And but anyway, it is a famous piece of track. As you come out of the parking lot here, you turn left and you go to the YMCA sign, and Bill King put that up. There's no name on it at all. It just says that's the site of the YMCA 1916. And years later we come along with a skating rink sign which says site of the skating rink, Girls Y, built in 1940. For years I didn't realize it was that far between the time they built the Boys Y, which was 16, and the Girls Y in 40. But it was put up in memory of Red Nesbitt and Tilly. And as you come on down the street there, we come to this company store. Yeah, I couldn't remember if I got that in there or not, because that's the last one we actually printed, or whatever you do to them. You don't print them, but you stick it on there. The company store, dry goods, 1903, same as the company store. And Jane Aswell Searly, she lives out in Texas now, and it's some kind of ranch out there where she lives. It's a whole town, but they call it a ranch. That's the name of the town. Then the next one is the company store upstairs. And it was also built in 1903, and it had Dr. Smith's office upstairs before they built the clinic. Then there was a WOW Lodge. They made a big deal about WOW back in those days. In fact, there's a WOW tombstone in the Bemis Cemetery. It's a big piece of tree. It's just tall, the limbs cut off of it. And they're all in all the old cemeteries, WOW. And then till 1908, there was, the Union Church was in there until 1908. And then the movie theater was in there after the church moved out until they built this and opened in 22. And that's sponsored by Nellie Maitland Gale, and in memory of her mother, Frances Levitt Maitland. And the next one is Company Store, 1903, sponsored by me and Brenda. And then we've got one open called The Cafe, which is right along in there. And then we got one for West Drugs, which is spoken for, but she's waiting. I don't know what, money, I guess. But anyway, Delinda Mitchell wanted the West Drugs, since she went in a lot of times. Then the depot sign is the next one as you make a turn there. And the depot was built in 1900 when the town was built. They had to have a place to stop the train because a lot of supplies were actually coming in by train. And it stayed there. And I have two on the table just past where Robert's operating. There's a picture of the old depot and the new depot on the same piece of paper. And you might want one of those. The first one was made out of Crisso post, and the second one was made out of concrete. Richard Simmons gave me this date because he knows about that, because he lived 100 feet from it and played inside of it. It was kind of like a fort to him. They played Cowboys and Indians, and that was the fort. And 1945 is when they actually tore it down. The train had already stopped a couple of years before that, but that was 1945 was a stop. There's still a slab of concrete out there where they unloaded freight if you want to go walk around out there. Okay, the next one is Silver Circle. Silver Circle was built in about the same time this place was built, 1921, and they built it for the bosses. They had, they always have a lot of bosses. Sometimes they say more chiefs than they have Indians. Well, they was building it for the chiefs, and to give them a nice place, better place than what we had, me and my family, mother and daddy, and I forgot how many places, I wrote it down somewhere. But anyway, it was nicer houses and had actually, every place up there had a bathroom. Everybody in back, Bemis didn't have a bathroom. But they did up there. I eventually ended up in Silver Circle, 2 different houses. And that's a story within itself, which I won't tell to a whole group. There's nothing racy about it, it's just kind of confidential like. Anyway, what's after Silver Circle? I didn't forget. Oh yeah, as you get into Silver Circle, there's Dr. Smith's house. That's where Sue lives now. So if you go to Dr. Smith, see Dr. Smith, and Sue answers the door, she's not going to doctor you. She's going to say wrong house. But he was born in 1880 and died in 64. And we went to Dr. Smith for a physical. You had to have a physical. I don't know if you do now or not, when we got married. And while he was there talking to us about whatever, I don't know, just chit-chatting, he was sharpening his needles with his finger on a whetstone. So that's how dull his needles were. And everybody can vouch for that. Okay, let's see here. What's next? Company store, up depot. Yeah, Mr. J.B. Young. J.B. Young, he was what they call the father of Bemis. He came here 6 or 8 months before Bemis was ever built and helped us do everything. And his house, I've got a map here where his house, the sewer run directly into the creek, and which was nothing strange in 1900. But then there's the next sign is the falls. This was erected at the same time that Bemis was being developed, because they had to have a place to stop the water to divert it to the mill so they could have steam. And there's a series of sluiceway that comes from the dam, and then it goes into 2 pipes and goes underground. And there's a cleanup, big, I call them bunkers, concrete things. There's 8 of them that come from the falls all the way to the mill pond, and they're cleanup plug holes. And the plumbers would have to get down in there because trees and limbs and leaves would get in those pipes and stop them up. And Jeff sponsored this one in honor of his brother, Dennis Glenn Haltom, sponsored by Jeffrey Dean Haltom. And it's at the end of 4th Street, right where the falls is, if you go through the weeds there. But it's not on the main like Massachusetts or Missouri. It's over on what I call the alley. Okay. West Bemis School. We've done a whole program on this school, but it was the first Rosenwald school in the, actually they kept started saying first Rosenwald school in Tennessee. And we finally determined it was the first Rosenwald school in the South. 1916, and it opened up for classes in 16. That'd been August back then, and not September. So it's a very unique school, and built in 1916. Mr. Rosenwald, who was a Sears Roebuck executive, financed 270 something schools over a, see, I was 16, 26 till 32 anyway, whatever that is. Okay, hog pens. The hog pens were determined, started in 1903. It wasn't really the first thing they had, as far as farm animals. First they had cows, cow barns, and chicken pens in the backyards and all that kind of stuff. But they were finally over, just people quit using them in 1960, and they just fell in. And Lynn Holly and Steve Fry ended up sponsoring that. They both liked it because they'd go up there and shoot rats with rifles all around the hog pens, a bunch of rats. And then we going up to the cemetery, and it was laid out in 1900 also, and it has space for 742 graves, and the first grave was 3-year-old Celia Walker, and I finally figured out where her grave is, and there's no tombstone, no nothing there, so I'm gonna start a program here pretty soon raising money to put her up a little tombstone. But anyway, she's not there. I mean, there's no recognition of her being there. This cemetery marker was sponsored by the family of William J. Carden and Bertha Bishop Carden. And Jamie's here tonight. She's granddaughter of that family. And then the next one is the former site. What we had to do, we've actually got the sign up, but when we was giving these to Robert, we didn't have a photograph of the marker because it was being printed, and she had a big job ahead of me, and she wouldn't hurry up and run my little job ahead. But anyway, it says the former site of Jimmy's Pit Barbecue, the best, that's what everybody said, 1940 to 1980. Home of Jimmy and Irene Sandlin, sponsored Lucy Smith. Lucy's sitting over there behind you. And the reason we have the former site on there, Lucy said, if you put Jimmy's Barbecue, people come to my house wanting barbecue. And I don't blame her. I wouldn't want them coming, kind of like going to Sue's house for Dr. Smith. It's a former. And but anyway, he was famous and for barbecue. And I found out after he retired, his cohort went over and started doing barbecue for Robert Holland, and then his name was Jimmy also, Jimmy Jones, and then he turned around and got Jimmy Sandlin to come help him. So it was kind of a close-knit group there. But all right, where are we here? We're down to the horse barn. The horse barn, is that next? Yeah, 1908. The horses got to smelling a lot around up here. It was right out here on our grassy area was where the horse barns were, right close to the office. And well, the office was like 150 feet to the south. But they decided the horses needed to be somewhere else, and they moved it and built that barn in 1908. Don Bemis, he liked the idea, and he thought it was a fantastic little place. When he's visited here a couple of times, and he saw it on the website or somewhere, he said, I want to sponsor that barn. And it's on the sign. He said, be sure to put on there, second cousin 3 times removed to Judson Moss Bemis. So that's who he is. And that's the old horse barn. I've got a picture of that barn about 10 years before, and it really looked good. Boy, it went down fast in the last 10 years. Okay, where are we now? The new town. It was built because of the influx. I mean, just people just got to moving into Bemis, and they needed more people, and they needed more housing. So in 1928, they started building. Well, as soon as they got started building, they built about a street and a half, and the cotton industry went kaput, and the sales went to almost to zero. It was the beginning of the Depression, and cotton industry got the first lick, and so they had to wait. And in 1931, things started kind of perking back up into cotton, because you can just go so long without a cotton shirt, and they started doing better. In 31, they built more houses, but a lot of there were some houses over on the last street that hadn't been occupied yet, and they couldn't get anybody in Bemis to do it because the rent was so high. It was like 75 cents a room, and everything else in Bemis was 50 cents. So, I mean, that's a 50% increase. And they had to rent them to employees of Bell Telephone Company, but they got them rented. And then we go to J.B. Young High School. It opened in 1940, and as a high school. Then it became an elementary school in 56 when Southside was open. And then we go to the Union Church next. It was, like we said, they moved from the upstairs company store to that special building, which was cut and drilled in Boston, Massachusetts. If you've never been in it, it'd be good to get an appointment to go through it. They're not there all the time. Or you can go to church there. I guess you're open on Sunday. But anyway, you don't have to have an appointment, do you? But anyway, it was almost prefabbed in Boston, and it's a fine looking church. Then there's the elementary school. Now this is the one we call the elementary school. It was the 2-story, had 5 grades in it. It's completed in 25. At first, when it was completed, it had the word letters or numbers 1925 up in the top of it. But they started construction in 24. Had 5 grades. I attended the 5th grade. Well, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and 5th, all in that building. Okay, next. Across the street on Tennessee Street, it's the original site of the Bemis School that was built in 1903. It had 150 students in 4 rooms. That was a pretty good little bunch of kids. But I guess that was common back then. They all had 30 and 35 students in a room. And I don't know what they did the first 2 years, but you have to remember the mill didn't actually start production until June of 01. So they went a year or so there without school, but school wasn't a big deal. You can skip a year and not even worry about it. We found that out with COVID, didn't we? They missed a whole year now. They're gonna go ahead and pass them anyway.
Joe,
Hey,
you said they two across the street from the brick building. One was stucco and one was wood.
we don't have a sign on that stucco building.
But what I mean, which was the first?
The white one, white clapboard. Yeah. And then when they built the stucco, that was the high school, first high school. But then we got a swimming pool is next, and this was put up by Larry Lawrence and Beverly, and he wanted a swimming pool. He said he spent a lot of time there. Well, we found out it was open on July the 4th in 26, yeah, 26th. And we also have a death certificate of a kid named Johnson, I don't forget what it is, who died July the 4th, 1926, at the Bemis swimming pool. So he was and I think we found out that he wasn't a Bemis person, but they could bring friends, and I think he was from down around Pinson. But anyway, person died the first day it was open. Then there's the cotton mill. As you come on around, these signs are in the order that you would drive them in a car. And then you got the cotton mill site of the Bemis cotton mill, 1900, when they started they didn't get the deed until January of 1900. It's sponsored by the family of Barbara Haney, Hardy Hanley, and Rachel. I can't even read it. It's from the side here. But anyway, it's Kathy's family, the Haneys. And let me get into my signs here. I've got a copy up here also. Yeah, here we go. Get caught up, so we won't have to look around the corner. If you'll notice, there's a sign in the foyer that says, go to the next one there, Robert. New Mill Office, built 1920, population 2,500. But it's in the foyer right now. I don't want to say too much about it, but the guy that has an office and owns that building over there, he pulled it up and gave it to us. I mean, stood it up out here in the yard. So I went back over and asked him, I said, did somebody tear that out, or do you know about it? He said, I don't want it. So we're gonna put it on this side, put an arrow on it, and still show the Bemis Mill office, because it's very, very important. Okay, that's all of that. Now our next phase, which won't take that long, but let me read. I'll just read my speech here. Back in January of 1963, we moved to 72 Monroe Street, and even at that early date, I was interested in history. I was in the library researching the unpublished works on Madison County, and I ran across a reference from Emma Inman Williams about Indians near the Forkadoo River. The little orange went in right in the center of the map. That's the one I'm talking about. This is an official state of Tennessee archaeological map. They've been out. When it said it was on the south side of the Forkadoo River, it caught my eye because that's where I lived, and that was almost my address she was talking about. And she downplayed it because the site was not officially a burial mound. And I went home and started looking, and that is very swampy, almost bottomland there, with only a slight rise in it, and was in cultivation corn year after year. Well, if you got corn and it rains, you have the land washes away. But being in the wintertime, it was easy for me to walk out there and inspect it, and I found a piece of flint, and then another, and then another. So I started, whoa, that's fine. We might have an arrowhead out here. And they were real small, but it was just evidence of flint napping, but no arrowhead. In the meantime, I've talked about this to somebody else, Larry Wright, who has got some art back here in the back about Bemis. He lived on that street, and he said he would go up there when it would rain and look for flint, and he never did find an arrowhead, but he referred to it as the swink, no, not swink. Anyway, it was the farm up there, and that's why it was always in cultivation. They owned it, Swinford Farm. Then I was talking to Billy Greer yesterday. He said he would go up there, him and Jerry Thomason. I don't know if anybody knows Jerry Thomason, but said they'd gone up there. And Billy said he found 2 arrowheads, and he kept them for about 50 years, and now he don't know where they are. But it was an Indian site, and but it wasn't very big. It was only about 30 feet high, and that kind of intrigued me, and I couldn't figure out why a mound would be just 30 feet high and kind of long. And so I started reading about Indian sites and discovered that they were fascinated by eagles. And sometimes they'd pile up dirt in the shape of a flying eagle, and they kind of like worshiped it or admired it, or maybe both. But this is my hand-drawn eagle. And there's the Forkadoo. The eagle is headed for the Forkadoo, and these streets behind him. But that's the way the dirt was kind of piled up in the center there, and it fizzled out as it went to the beak and the end of the tail, and even at the end of the feathers just kind of blended into the swampy land, not swampy land, but lowland there. but that was kind of the shape that I remember it, and I don't know what it was 1,000 years before when they built the thing, because I figured they were the same Indians that were at Pinson, and that was about 1,000 years. Well, it was in the year 1,000. And but anyway, with a little imagination, I could see an eagle, and the thing was about 500 feet from beak to tail, the way I figured it, and it was even wider than it was long, but I got it drawn wrong. But the wing and tail ended up just going into the ground. I continued to look for arrowheads and flint every year while I lived there, and I guess I never found an arrowhead because no Indian ever did lose one. They were very careful. Further research with the state revealed that it actually had an official number, which was on there a while ago, and it has its cultural affiliation was undetermined, because there were not even tribes at that point. They were just people that lived together and gatherers and whatever. And but it had been disturbed, and so the state had a little problem with that when it came out, and been plowed so many times it had actually destroyed it as a historical site, and it was deemed useless for further research, is what was on the paper. He sent me the guy sent me a map. Sent me the paperwork here, the official names. Now there's another little drawing on there that's in yellow, and that is over on what we used to call the J.B. Young football field, and it's a tree line now going north and south, and it was another site that had a lot of flint and so forth. And Rosalie has that referred to on her little chart back here on her, where she has her drawings and paintings and so forth. But it's also an official site, but they think it's more recent than the first one, and maybe even remains of a plantation, a dump site for the plantation when it was the Jackson plantation. But at least they camped out or whatever, and they had an effigy. They call these renditions of eagles and so forth. They had some all over the United States. In fact, I found out that there's 15 to 20,000 effigies or mounds and snakes and eagles and so forth around the United States. But this effigy was an eagle in Bemis, so we can call it the Bemis Mound, Bemis Indian Mound. That's what everybody called it before I came along. And so now you know all about Bemis Indians, or at least you know all I know. That's it. Anybody else have anything or any questions on this? I just about told you everything I found out.
Do you want to say something about that?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to tell you. That's Miss Bemis. Miss Bemis, the only Miss Bemis there ever was. And her daddy sponsored her in the Miss Bemis, Miss Tennessee contest. And he worked in the office. He got Bemis to finance her as a contestant if she would take the name of Miss Bemis. She did, and she was voted Miss Congeniality. And I have Jackson newspapers about the Miss Tennessee pageant back then. And then what does it say? 1955 down there? Yeah, July or whatever. But that's the only Miss Bemis there ever was. So if anybody wants to displace her, call yourself Miss Bemis, we'll vote on you. Anybody have anything else? All right.